So you in the middle, yes? You go yes, you go here. You go to this side. Sebastian on one side, Christian on the other side. Good morning! And then go close together and look in the direction of the Herederas.
Okay.
This way here, please.
And if you want, you can smile. Huh? That's no problem.
Over here, please.
All right, we'll do without the producers.
Yes.
And yours. That's you. Now just the director and the three actors.
Okay. Hello.
Very handsome.
This way here, one side. Left side. It's better on the left side. Please, here, please. Yes, thank you.
All right. Should we do just you three together and maybe you go in the middle? So we just do the ladies here.
Okay.
Should we do singles?
Yes.
All right. So we do singles.
De a una ahora. De a una.
You're the starter. Over here.
Look here.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right.
Yeah. My name is Anna. Thank you. Sit down.
Another director. Thank you very much. Bueno.
Yeah, please.
Great job.
And this one?
Hello.
Yeah, Photoshop.
Hello and welcome to the Berlinale press conferences of today, and we're starting with the movie Las Herederas from Paraguay. It's not an everyday occurrence that this country is represented in the competition, and on top of this, it's also the directing debut of Marcello Martinessi. He tells us about two women who live together. One of them has to go to jail, and the other one, having to fend for herself now, sets up a taxi company and drives around rich ladies. At the same time, we get to see a cross-section of today's society. So it is, if you will, a typical taxi movie which has become a genre unto itself, and this now is the press conference.
Elegante, de anteojos oscuros. Esa es la de Gómez. Esa que asesinó al marido y salió en todos los diarios. ¿Te acuerdas?
Sí, me acuerdo.
Y esa otra que viene ahí bailando, de sombrero de cowboy, esa es de mi mismo pabellón. Clint Eastwood se le dice.
Chiqui, qué rápido que comiste.
Chiqui, un puchito. Esconde la casa.
Falta.
Cada vez que me ve fumando me pide.
Guten Morgen, ich begrüße Sie ganz herzlich zur Pressekonferenz dieses Filmes im Wettbewerb. Ich glaube, das ist ein wichtiger Film.
I think this is an important film. It's also the first Paraguayan film ever in the competition of an international art festival, so very important.
The film is
a Paraguayan, Uruguayan, German, Norwegian, French co-production. And I'd like to introduce you to our guests. We have, first of all, our German co-producer, Christoph Riedl. Welcome to you. We have actor Margarita Irún. Anna Brun, also actor.
We have
the director, Marcello Martinessi. Another actor, Anna Ivanova. And the Paraguayan producer, Sebastián Peña Escobar.
So,
I'd like to ask the first question. In this film, this is about a very intimate story. But I think also that this private, intimate story is very important in order to tell the history of the country, or at least the history of recent decades. Because we're talking here about an immobility and politics. Marcelo, do you have a response to that? Yes, I actually think that I always feel that I wanted to tell a story that in an enclosed space, because in Paraguay, to some extent, we have certain heritage, certain customs, which make us feel like we're in a big prison. And it seemed important to me, and I thought that my generation was going to change that. I thought my generation was somehow going to give birth to a new society. And what happened in 2012 in Paraguay was big. And we thought we were going to change the model. We thought we were going to have a different model. And it was important to tell this story, which I wanted to give it more force than we normally see. And so I started to think about this house, which is like a little prison for this woman. But it's a real prison, but there's more liberty. And I think the history of Paraguay is a history. The whole history of Paraguay has its these big masters, these men who are typical of the country. And I think in spite of that, I think it's the women ultimately who are the internal tissue of society. So it was going to be very important for this film to take place in a world where women are seen as an object, but also to show that women, working with women, based on a story which is about women, which is women in cinema, where the men are more or less secondary. They're marginal in this story. So do we have the first questions from the press? Yes, please. Over on the left.
Federico Kersing, Köln Campus. Apart
from a political critique here, is this a social critique as well? Because all these women, and I'm remembering my grandmother, my aunts and so forth, also in Bolivia, how they behave, how they talk, and the servants they have. Is it also a criticism of this group of ladies? Because there's Angie, yeah, I think is the one who talks differently. Yes. Yes, it's a vision. I don't know if it's just about a social class, but sometimes they get caricatured, right? And we're trying to escape that. We're trying to work a bit with seeing what's happening in society as women who are, if you like, a group, and the group that are with them. There's not much mobility socially, and we're working a great deal around this chisme. There's a writer in the 50s, Casasqua, who wrote a story about Paraguay, about a little village where gossip played a big role. Everyone talks about everyone else all the time, and I think this happens all over the country, and all the cast do it, or most of them. And we're trying to get away from that So if it is a criticism, yes, but I think it's a narrative structure for the film. There are scenes, though, that break with that, aren't they? The way she talks to her servant and the way she goes to eat that street food, I think that would be unthinkable for the Paraguay of my grandmother. Yes, we're talking, when we talk about the film, I like to think that it's a film that is looking to the future. It's looking at what could happen if we manage to succeed with this process of change.
Ja, Matteo Galli, close up. The
main stylistic device in the film is a lack of focus. Only the figures in close-up are focused. The rest is constantly a little bit blurred. What was the point of that?
I
think in the narrative, in the aesthetic of this film, it's like a veiled story. It's neither in those scenes, nor in the dialogue, nor in the imagery. Constantly everywhere you have this desire to hide things. Is that the answer to your question? Because you're talking about lack of focus? And I think the film is focused. Could you put your question again, briefly? Yes, I'm talking about a blurred focus. Only the figures in close-up are in focus. The rest is a little out of focus. The environment, the background, is permanently... Yeah, okay, I get it. Thank you. Sorry. No, I think that we are working with this artistic photography, with a camera. We're trying to isolate these figures. They're always very much on their own within their environment. Yes, that's true. Yes, please. It seemed to me very interesting the way you deal with sexuality, homosexuality in the film, because you don't at any point see discrimination. Knowing that Brazil, for example, is in such a difficult situation now, I don't know if it's a little bubble. Is it true that there are no problems with this in Paraguay? Or is actually the situation for homosexuality, is it really not a problem in Paraguay? Well, actually, there is a big problem in Paraguay with this. We don't even have a basic law on non-discrimination. But what's happening is that we're talking here, I think, we're talking about a situation where it seems to us, obviously, we're talking about a higher social class here, and if you're a member of a higher social class, you're less likely to encounter discrimination than if you're looking for work or at work. But it's also a very conservative society, and there's a lot of repression in every sense. So there's also an internal issue. All the personalities here are members of this lost generation under Stroessner, who had to hide everything, their desire, their sexuality. It was a very repressive regime. And in a way, I think that these are people who have certain phobias of their own, which they embody. And someone says, one of the women says to the other, "You're like a child." And I tried to embody these different phobias in the same people. We have to work on that, but it's a reflection on what's happening around it. I didn't want to put a simple tag on people, a simple label. There's a question over here. Okay, let's take that one. Yes, please. Oh, you have an answer? Yes, please. With the microphone, please. Microphone. It's very important for us. There's a lot of discrimination and an absence of rights in Paraguay. The fact that we can be here at the Berlinale is very important for us. It makes it possible that we can open this up. And that's part of the change that we're witnessing in Paraguay.
Good morning. Marcelo Luciana Veras, Revista Continente Brasil. in English to make it easy for everybody. Your movie, you said earlier that it speaks about a condition in Paraguay now that reflects everything that happened in your country since your coup d'etat that happened in 2012. In Brazil, we had a coup d'etat 2 years ago, and the first female president elected to take office was ousted. And we in Brazil are living through that hell. I wanted you to talk about your movie in parallel with all the Latin American countries. We know we face the same troubles. Brazil is much more bigger than Paraguay, but we have the same issues, such as a homophobic society and political turmoil going on. And also, I wanted to ask the three actors, how did you approach your character? Was the screenplay all speaked out? Did you tell your actors everything that was going to happen, or did you give them chance so that they could find the characters by themselves? Thank you.
Te respondo brevemente antes de pasarles a ellas la palabra.
I'll start, but I'm going to pass this question on to the others. I think, obviously, in every region it's difficult. It's a difficult situation for culture in general. I don't know whether Paraguay is typical, but of course, we got a lot of support from Euromedia, for example, because we don't have a real cinema fund, film fund in Paraguay of our own. So, on this issue of politics, I think it's important to say that Paraguay is in some way fairly invisible in cinema terms. This is part of the obscurity that we're trying to deal with here in this film. So this is to remind us that we're living in a society doing the same as it's been doing for the last 50 years. But for me at least, I want to reach the audience in Paraguay because we've been through this really hard coup, as you said. But of course, the history goes back a lot further, and it's a black screen. In '69, there was a very important film in Paraguay, which is Pueblo, but everything else is just official history, which is written by the regime, basically, over many, many years. And whereas in Brazil, in Mexico, there were people telling fantastic stories, including in cinema. In Paraguay, we didn't have that. There was practically nothing but this official image of the president. I'm going to pass this on now to the actors. Yeah, this is true. We didn't know each other. It's very difficult to get personal information about people. And we had a lot of work working on those characters with the director. Especially, I needed to work closely with Ana Brun, and we got together, we talked about our characters and exchanged opinions about how we felt. How would we drink our cup of coffee, for example? What about smoking? I had to practice smoking a cigarette in this certain way. So yes, you have to build your character around all this. How was I going to get up? What side was I going to get up on out of bed? There are lots of sides to a character, and Marcelo helped us through this. Of course, these characters are living together. They have a relationship which is, let's say, a little bit forgotten as well. There's a kind of redundancy in that relationship, and that's something we experience throughout our country. So this is cinema, so it had to be a very important sign for Paraguayan society, and that's the fact that we're here says everything. Do you want to tell us something about your work? The rehearsing? How did I work on my character? No, I'm going to leave it to the director. She's a bit nervous. She was like this when we were working together as well, all the time, when we were shooting the prison and so forth. So nervous. My character is a bit like my life. And that's it. That's it. I didn't build on much. Well, the interesting thing building Angie with Marcelo was that we took a very subtle pathway here. And in this big metaphor, which the film is, I think certainly for me, Angie is a bit like the history of women. Okay, Angie talks all the time, but all the time she's telling you a story. And it doesn't matter what she's saying, the important thing is what you're hiding. And I think Angie tells things. It doesn't matter what she's telling, the important thing is that she's trying to put things into words. And if you think about the debt we have to women in my history, because we have this militarized history where women just didn't exist in the past. And Angie is romantic, she's musical. But working with Anna Brun was great. So from that point of view, I think there's a violence in the silence. There's a visible violence in society, but there's also an invisible violence too, and that's what the film talks about, because it forces us to be silent. We're not supposed to be happy because we're women, because we're old, because we're on our own, because we missed the train, whatever. So Angie tries to overcome all that with words, and she's trying to overcome that invisible violence which is everywhere, all out over society. So there is a way of hitting people in the face where you can see the violence, but there's an invisible way about being bitchy about people or isolating people. And that's what happens with Angie. So if you like, she's a symbol of liberty, this constant cheerfulness, but we try to make it subtler. And there are things that she does hide. Every woman has this silent violence. And she's also hiding it with her words. She can lie with her words as well.
Anne-Christine Loranger, Magazine Séquence Montréal. Muchas gracias para esta película.
Thank you very much for that film, which is sophisticated and original. It seems to me that it's a metaphor about freedom. And it also seems to me that this freedom, Chela is searching for her freedom, and she comes across all the different levels of society as she does it. For me, this is a very deep path, a profound path for this quest for liberty. Would you respond to that? Perhaps tell us a little bit more, especially the women up there, about freedom and sexuality. Yes, I do feel a bit like you were saying. I think it was a tussle, a fight for my liberty, to break that silence in which I grew up, in the society in which I grew up. The partnership I was involved in for very many years, which was a partnership that no longer had any meaning. So yes, it's a quest for liberty in every sense, because my life in general has been very similar to that of Chela. And it was very hard for me to achieve my freedom. And in the film, at the end, you get that. I end by breaking that chain that normally all of us have to break for ourselves.
Ja, herzlichen Glückwunsch, Ute Hermann.
Yes, congratulations, Ute Hermann from Topikos. Thank you for this marvelous film. I really enjoyed it, and I was trembling the whole time that there would not be an accident in the car, because then maybe the film would have become very ordinary. did understand at the beginning that because of debts you were put in prison, and that was somehow restructured into fraud. How did that happen? I thought that was a little bit difficult to understand. Can you explain that to me? Is that a Paraguayan speciality, that if you have debts, suddenly you become a fraudster? Yes, that's true. Paraguay, we have a film where it happens very often in Paraguay, but it depends on your personal power. You can prevent yourself from going to prison. If you've got power, if you're a bank or something. But if not, if someone's got power, if it's a bank, they can easily send you to prison for not paying the money. And I think in a country like Paraguay, we're not very protected with our rights in this field. We have a very corrupt banking world. And sometimes they can send you to prison, and it's not because of debt, but there's another kind of corruption at play, much more serious. So, and here I am on the red carpet. And you have this little woman, at least is how I interpret it, very possessive, dominant little woman, because she's living off my money, right, in this film. And I go to visit her. She's a bandit.
Oh my God. No, Chiquita, justamente en la película.
Chiquita in the film, she says, fraud? How come? How come fraud? And this is the question, yeah.
Hello, my name is Carmen Salas. I'm here for Cine Encuentro from Peru. Okay. I would like to ask the question in Spanish, if it's okay.
Yeah.
Es un método común en las películas.
It's a method in films, isn't it, that you address polygamy or falling in love with other people. But what do you think about monogamy? Is it an appropriate lifestyle these days? Or is it simply a vehicle for violence and oppression? I think in the society we live in, whatever model it pursues, whether we're talking about men or women, there's always oppression. In my particular case, I think these are just different social, legal, religious ways of approaching polygamy. But I live in a very political society. But what is happening with Chela and Angie is a political expression, because it doesn't have to be a man and a woman. Sometimes the difference is in age. This metaphor using women's, of course it's powerful, because women are very strong in the image, in cinema, in art. But we're not so much looking for an answer. We're asking questions with subtle symbols. And all the weaknesses of society, and I think that goes for Paraguay too, but also other societies, are reflected here. We don't have this whole idea of gender. We don't have any laws on gender in Paraguay. We don't have any laws protecting people from discrimination. You have to be young, pretty. As soon as you become a mother, you become the property of the man. This is the only system we have in our society. And this film is brave enough to focus on these women who have to live with this violence, this repression, this silence all the time. They try to make us invisible, and we're making them visible. Yes, thank you for that.
Yo soy mexicana, vengo de México.
I'm from Mexico.
Lo que decías de que Paraguay es un país.
You're saying that Paraguay is an invisible country in cinema. Unfortunately, Paraguay is invisible in every respect, not just in cinema. We hear so little about Paraguay. So perhaps now you can give it more visibility with this film. As for corruption, what happens in Paraguay is happening in all our countries. And the prisons are full of poor people. It's the same everywhere. But my question is, With respect to the treatment, I don't know if I even dare talk about homosexuality because you do it so subtly here and so tentatively that some people might say, oh, they're just two women who live together. So what was the source of this? You're young, you had your mother, you had your grandmothers, you observed what happened to that generation that lived under this repression, under Stroessner. And obviously now this repression gets passed on. And it's still being passed on. This is a country that is not changing and is not going to change. And any steps it takes are really tiny little steps, but not very clear steps. So what was your source of inspiration for this treatment, which is so subtle, so cautious? I think it's true, I grew up with a lot of women around me. My mother, my grandmother, my great aunts, and I was always left with women around me, and they looked after me, and so I paid attention. And a lot of things in the film come from my childhood memories. For example, that tray. It's a bit strange, isn't it? But for me as a child, it was quite normal that everyone had a tray with a glass of water and a coffee and their rosary and stuff. And now I think about that, and I realize it wasn't as normal as I thought as a child. So on the one hand, it makes life comfortable, but on the other hand, the tray enables you to keep control over all your processes. So there are a lot of different gazes there. As a child, I didn't really understand what was happening, but suddenly I realized with these two women, okay, they're living together in this house, they don't have husbands, all kinds of relationships that I was aware of as a child. I didn't really understand why they were doing that. So I'm asking these questions. And talking to other people, I suddenly realized that it's got something to do with the fact that the men have all the answers in Paraguay. It's almost wrong as a man to ask a question. We have 3 short questions still. 1, 2, 3.
My name is Heiresses, African Refugee News. I have a question for the director and a small one for the producer. In this film, it's not only the story between the two ladies, but you're structuring the life of 4 different women: the rich, the not rich, the maid, and the young, let's say the young woman that doesn't know where to go, left or right. And she plays with the feelings of the other people. This is what I see. How did you manage to do this? Is this because you studied philosophy or something? Because this is very religious. To know, because you don't touch only the part about sex or love. You touch about the feelings of the people. And to the producer, how did you come in the project? And I read that also the Berlinale is part of this funding. So can you tell us more about how you did it? Thank you.
Bueno, muchas gracias. Me parece que hay una cuestión.
It seems to me that there is a magic aspect to the cinema that you don't think about. Normally we're talking about this balance of feelings. You know, magically often you can't explain things, but you intuit them, and this works in many fields. The same with the cast. I did the casting face to face to see what energy developed with these people. And the woman, for example, who works in the prison, I got them together with my characters to see what chemistry developed between them, because I didn't want to just take separate pieces and just work with my brain. There are other components going on here too. So I needed to observe those energies between the potential cast members. And I think film shows us that there's a lot more going on than we sometimes show. Yeah, thank you for your question, says the producer. The question, I've been working with Marcelo. I've done some co-productions in Paraguay with Argentina and Spain. And at this point, we were trying to develop the scope to work on a new project, and I thought Marcelo is a fantastic person because he's developed this big metaphor for our society, and I could really identify it. The characters in the cast and so forth, and I wanted to be part of that project. World Cinema Fund was a key to getting the financing together for this film, because in our country, as my colleagues were saying before, it's a bit difficult. We don't have many institutions of the kind that can give support to films. So if we needed to get funding from Paraguay, we had to set up a co-production structure to work with other countries too, because we're probably the smallest film in the competition, but of course we do co-productions with others, with Brazil, with Germany, with France, all the time. And the fact that we could work with these other countries made it possible to make the film. So this structure for financing helped us get the funds we needed, but also the co-producers were important. For example, Marcelo was always at my side. That was very important, and we're very grateful to him. We're very grateful for how all this worked out. Two brief questions, please.
One question to
Wikimedia Germany.
It's a great film. There are three great actresses. Maybe you can tell us something about how do you have chosen these actresses? Are they all from Paraguay? Are they well known in Paraguay, or did they have a theatrical background, or is it their first movie?
Bueno, muchas gracias. Realmente para mí fue mucha suerte en este camino.
I was very lucky with the casting, because casting is obviously the very difficult process in cinema, because it's partly about the personality and it's partly about the wavelength that the personality is on. Margarita Irún, she's very well known in Paraguay. She has a long career, and when she came to the casting, she said, "There is no Lorca character I have not played." So fantastic. And I love her work, but she also has a lot of experience in the theater, but also in cinema in Paraguay. And she has a training college for young actors as well. So there was a lot of experience that she brought into a team. Anna Brun had never done cinema before. It's her first film. And for me, this was a very important gain for us in all this project, because we worked a lot, we talked a lot with the producers and with the others, and Anna Brun was a fantastic cinematographic opportunity. And I went to see her reciting poetry in Paraguay. She's been doing this for about 25 years. So I first saw her on YouTube, and it seemed to me very important that she's supported in the cinematography by those who have more experience with film. And this is what happened with Anna. So we worked on this. Anna Ivanova has been working a lot in Paraguay. She works with artists, she does performances, she does painting, she does short films. She's done a whole lot of different things, and she's always working. So I had two very experienced actors, and one thing's very important here in casting. What I could see in each one of them was they all had a lot, they were very keen on a challenge, and this is very important at that moment when you see that an actor wants to invest herself in a role, invest in a cause, in something. I think that's very important, because when you go out of this film, at the beginning of the process, of course, economically, we didn't have a lot of time to work on the characters, so it was important to get this teamwork going. Last question. I think you wanted to ask a question, didn't you? Okay, then the last question here.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you. I think the applause for the film when it was presented just now ago tells us a great deal about the way you've connected with the audience here. And it's very important to know that you are making films. And it's about a theme that hasn't been touched upon very much in cinema. At least I can't remember lesbianism, older women, or mature women anyway. And this is something that I think touches us very closely, all of us. All of us women have taken part in these processes, and I think this has a great deal to say, and especially to a lot of women, and I hope that you reach a broad audience. Is there any chance that you will come to Mexico? I hope so. And I'd like to know, when will it be released in Paraguay and what reception do you expect there? Well, our objective, of course, is to make it possible. In Paraguay, we're starting to talk to the distributors. We want to bring this into the cinemas as quickly as possible, if we can do that. And, of course, we hope to be in Mexico too. We're working with Luxbox on that, because I think it's really important that this film gets around, especially in Latin America. Because obviously everything that the film talks about relates to people, a lot of people, and we hope it reaches as many people as possible. Okay, that was it. Thank you very much. Thank you. Fantastic. Thank you for your film.